I wanted to continue the ideas that I was starting with in my previous video about a more meta-modern approach to studying the scriptures and how we teach the scriptures. And in the previous video, I really took it from like a historical view, using a linear timeline and multiple timelines to kind of show how, we have one timeline going from past to future in one place that's represented by the Bible, but then there's other streams, other places, and people doing other things. And the ways that they connect, I think it's really important for us to study that, because the reality is that now we live in this internet age where it's, somebody else had said, it's a little bit of everything all at once. It's at our fingertips, and there's this deluge of information overload. And we can get addicted to simply learning new things or hearing about new things. But the goal is obviously that we want the information that we're learning and consuming to enrich our own lives and to help us to grow, and especially as Christians to grow closer to God. And so, the danger of the internet is that you can latch onto some aspect of it and it can take you down a path, a rabbit hole of, a really destructive place, because you have no way of deciphering what is true and what is false. And if you go over multiple streams, you will see that there's conflicting things. But usually what happens is we end up getting into these echo chambers where the algorithms are feeding us information based on what we like and dislike, and these echo chambers are built on binary things, because we like one type of information, one worldview, one mindset, one narrative, and we strongly oppose a very different one. And really what it's only ever feeding us then is those two. It's feeding us the one that makes us angry, because that produces engagement, and the one that reinforces us and reassures us, because that produces engagement. But what that does is it reduces the world down to like a simple binary thing, so like these culture war dynamics, or it could be many things. There's many of these types of binary echo chambers that get created, and there's people on both sides of those binaries too. But the beautiful thing about the previous model is that if we were to take like one stream, like Western civilization, Christianity, and you get into like a fight between Catholics and Protestants, you can still go on the internet and find lots of Catholic and Protestant echo chambers where people are focused on these polemics, these apologetics, just on fighting over the same tired topic. Another one you go to is like the evolution versus creation one. But really, outside of those echo chambers, there's people who care very little about that whole thing. And especially when you're interacting with somebody who isn't already in an established thing, if somebody doesn't know anything about Christians and they meet you, they're going to project onto you everything that they know from anecdotal, circumstantial evidence about Christians and what Christians believe and what they practice. And they're going to assume that is true of you, or they may ask you about it. And now that we have these popular images, like recently there's two documentaries. There was the Shiny Happy People about the Duggars, independent fundamental Baptist type, homeschooling, crazy little rabbit hole. And then there was another one, which is The Secret of Hillsong, which is about money and power and corruption and all this stuff. They're both about, they both want to make it about that, because the producers are both in an echo chamber of Christianity is bad. Well, that's such a narrow view. And if those are the only two things you knew about Christianity, and then you meet somebody who's a Christian, hopefully you'll be surprised that they're not one of those two things, whatever that is. And so the thing is that as Christians, we have to study all the other stuff that's been going on outside of our own little bubbles, our own little containers. And I think that that's a really good thing that we have the chance to do, because what happens is when you're in a bubble, you're in a little community, there's a temptation on those who are in charge to try to exclude outside information. But at some point, people go out into the world, whether it's going to college or the workplace or whatever their interactions may be, and they find out, oh, I was in a little bubble. And because the reality that they experience is different from what they were taught in the bubble, they more or less take their prior experience and reject it wholesale. And so this is a problem where and this is a problem for Christians of all stripes, so Catholic, Protestant, evangelical, mainline, to whatever degree it is, either it wasn't an important part of their life to begin with, or it was a really unbalanced part of their life, but once they get into reality, it causes them in their own life to go back to the beginning, reassess everything that they have experienced previously, and if the new information, the new truth that they have uncovered invalidates what they learned previously, they're going to reject it. And that's like the deconstruction. Now, hopefully, as people become more aware of this, they do a better job of engaging children and young people to keep them from being so isolated in these little bubbles. And if we are successful at that, then they're not so shocked when they get out into the world. But that means that we, as teachers and more mature believers, also need to be more aware of all these other things that are going on. And I think the verse where Jesus talks about the unauthorized exorcist is a really good one to think about, because I'll take for example somebody like the LDS and the recent movie Sound of Freedom. Tim Ballard's the main character, and he's LDS. Now there's a lot of YouTube channels and books and things telling you LDS people do not believe what is true about God and the Bible. It's not real Christianity. Therefore, the people are not Christians. Therefore, they're people that need to be converted to Christianity, or they're people that we need to be avoiding, lest we become deceived by their messaging. But then you look at this story and say, this guy apparently has a really wrong brand of Christianity. And I will agree. Many people are correct in saying that there are lots of problems with the propositional beliefs of LDS Mormonism. They wrote another Bible that messes the whole thing up. It's a big problem. And yet you have a person who is very much committed to the teachings of Jesus, especially in his commitment to this. Jesus is saying, if anyone harms one of these little children, causes them to stumble, it's better for them to have a millstone tied around their neck and be cast into the sea. He takes that verse more seriously than 99.999% of all the evangelical and fundamentalists and mainline and Catholic Christians in the world. And he goes and does something about it. And so, in a sense, it's like when the disciples come to Jesus and say, Lord, this guy's casting out demons in your name, and we don't know who he is or what he's doing. And he is using his name. He's using the name of Jesus. We don't know. But he's doing the right thing. And so what do we say? Hey, he's not our enemy. So enemy is a label that we can't give to an LDS Christian who is doing good works for the kingdom. And we can get into the whole thing about motivation and are they doing it, so that they'll get a reward? Well, Maybe, but we do not understand our own motives personally all the time. And so to accuse somebody else of that is something we should be very cautious about. And it certainly doesn't invalidate what is actually done. We're not going to go to those kids and say, we're really happy that you were rescued from slavery, but unfortunately the person who rescued you has a bad understanding of Jesus, and so we want to warn you not to listen to him and listen to me instead, a guy who just talks on the internet and doesn't do that much. Well, that's ridiculous, okay? So, your actions speak louder than words. So in some ways we can say there's lots of people whose words are wrong, and yet their actions show that their internal belief may be better than ours in some ways. Now, so that's to say, the world is just not nearly as simple as we think it is. But we need something to navigate this chaos, because if we are exposed to a little bit of everything all the time, we need to be deciphering the good from the bad, the useful from the dangerous. And so, again, we go to the Bible. The Bible is our best bet, I would say. And this is the thing where I say, apologetics, is apologetics like the answer? Like, there's a lot of people saying, like, yeah, apologetics is the answer. We need more of that, because kids aren't learning a lot of stuff. And I think there's some truth to that, but there's a problem with apologetics if we're just learning it on a level of interesting facts or refutations to arguments, because you may have a tree, and that tree doesn't have deep roots. And if if the tree is a person who doesn't have deep roots, then whatever winds will come will knock them down. And the goal of apologetics is to help them defend themselves. Well, without the true deep understanding of who Christ is, what he's done for you, without an actual active participatory relationship with Christ, having a bunch of apologetics knowledge is like adding more and more roots that are just on the surface, or they're just 2 inches deep. It will give a tree a little bit more stability to have that, but at the end of the day, it's not really doing what it needs to do. And in some sense, if you think about it, it's like, well, that gives it gives a tree more opportunity to grow big because it can absorb more water, but it doesn't necessarily help it in its ability to weather storms, because what helps a tree to weather storms is the depth of its roots and the strength of its deep roots. That's what anchors it to the soil. And so the Bible is the tool through which we can really help ourselves be anchored to God, studying it appropriately. And so the last time I kind of went through a historical kind of timeline view. This time I'm going to kind of do a little different, where I'm starting from the person. The person. So here's a person, and here's their Bible, and they are reading it every day and trying to learn from it. Now, that alone is really important. One thing I would say from the previous video is, when you see like that overarching effect, it's really important to learn the Bible as a whole, to know that there is a consistent narrative flow throughout it. You might not be able to study every single part of it as in-depth as others. For instance, I have not spent nearly so much time really digging into a lot of the prophets. At some point I hope to, but it hasn't been the necessary thing for me to really study deeply. Yet I've read them through many times, and it does help you to get a sense, and it helps you to understand what's going on. And when you get to the New Testament, you see how a lot of these things are being used, and then you can go back and then you can start to understand it more. And for some other people, it might be other parts of the Bible that so you can't study everything in depth. That would be the goal. Know everything about the Bible fully. But even people who memorize the words of the Bible may not necessarily understand it deeply. That's another instance in which you can have sort of wide roots that don't anchor you deeply. But so what I would say is that it's very important to have an understanding of the overall narrative of the Bible. And there's lots of resources that can help with that. Something like Bible Project or something like that. That can help you kind of, at least you know what all the books are about, why they're in the order they are, how they fit together. Reading it from front to back is something that I think is absolutely necessary at least once, but ultimately multiple times. But once you read through the whole thing, then there may be other parts of it that you want to study. And that might be a certain book. Maybe you just want to park out in Genesis for a long, long time, or you want to stay in one of the Gospels for a long, long time and just get really deep into what that book says. But I think one of the ways that we can become more connected to the whole body of Scripture is through the themes and the topics. And so, for instance, this is what we're going to say. So here's a person in their Bible. They read through the Bible once, hopefully. Or maybe they are reading through the Bible once for the first time. As they're reading through, things naturally will stick out to you. But, maybe if we draw attention to this, we can help the process along a little bit. So I would say, like, the first thing is that we have, and this is a universal experience for everybody, is that they have some sense of family. Now, everybody's existence proves that they had or had at some point a biological father and a biological mother. Now, they may have a bad relationship with their father and mother. They may have an absent parent, deceased, abusive, all sort of things. So there may be all sorts of reasons why a person has unhealthy, negative understandings about family. And therefore, when they read about terms about family in the Bible, they have an unclear image. But at least they have something. And the wonderful thing about the Bible is that it uses the terminology of family to describe God and contrasts it through people and their stories. So if you don't have a good relationship with your father, God is our Father. And not only is God our Father, but there are many, many examples of fathers in the Bible. Some of them really great, some of them not so much, most of them not so much, really. And that is the contrast that we can kind of pick up on. There's things about mothers in the Bible. There's things about brothers and sisters. And of course, being a father also tells us things about being a son, or being a daughter. And so as we read through, our perceptions of what it means to be a father, a son, a mother, a brother, a sister will hopefully change and shift and be informed by what the Bible is teaching us. So we have a connection point. Everybody has some sort of family, and then we take our knowledge about family, run it through the lens of what the Bible teaches, and then it should reshape and change our understanding of family. Now, there's many other topics. So, over here I have kind of a depiction of nature, and there's much imagery in the Bible about natural things, places, things, mountains, rivers, fields, trees, flowers, The rainbow has an important role. So once again, those are things that we are already familiar with in real life. We already have a connection to nature. There are disconnects because things change over time. We maybe look at pictures of Israel from today, and it's a very arid, dry place. Parts of it were in Bible times, parts of it were much more forested. So maybe it's good for us to not only look at like the geography of Israel or something, compare it to our where we live, but just to know about more things in general. Because there are more things in the Bible than some of our preconceived notions. But as we learn more about nature, which we do from the age of small children, we learn things about being outside. You look at what kids learn even before they go to school. They're learning about animals and plants and things like that. So we take what we know already, we read into the Bible, and then we see what is God doing when he's talking about trees and rivers and mountains, and they become, in a sense, characters in the narrative, because if they weren't important, they wouldn't be mentioned. We don't, it's not like a novel where they're just gonna have a scene where they describe the surroundings so that we can get a mental picture. That's a part of it, but really the way the Bible is written, it's so sparse that any detail that is in there has significance and importance, and we should study it. And the other thing we can do is, like with, for instance, if we were going to look at fathers in the Bible, we can go from Genesis to Revelation and pore over every instance where a father is doing something to learn not just about a father, but how fathers as a category exists, and how God views it, because this is the Word of God. And so and we can do the same thing with something like rivers or mountains and go through the whole story with our eye focused on that element. And this is part of the reason why we need to reread and reread. Now, of course, one of the great things about living in a internet era is that we have all these tools that make it incredibly easy to just go to those things. So once you have the overall narrative grasp of the Bible, which is really why it's still super important to read the whole thing at least once, then you can maybe search for things and then go do some study on those and read it a little bit more in depth. And it could also be that maybe some elements in the text pop out to you, they become salient, and you have curiosity about them, you want to know them. It could be something about, maybe it's, a lot of times it's the weird stuff, angels or something. So you learn about angels, I'll just write angels. I'm not going to draw an angel. But you learn about angels in the Bible, and then you want to go back to the Bible and find the other places and see what they're doing, so you get a kind of a grasp of it. Now there's other areas of this. So food. Food is very important in the Bible. When people are having meals, sometimes a sacrifice is a meal. A lot of times, other times there's just meals. The topic of hospitality, but also the different types of food. Wine represents something significant. We look at the story of Noah, and maybe we say, "Oh, stupid Noah! He got drunk. What an idiot! What was he thinking?" But is that like what's really going on there, or is there something more to that story? And I think that Noah, he's come through the flood. He's come out of the ark. This is Earth 2.0. Maybe in the previous world, because it was such a sinful place, the abuse of alcohol was one of the central figures, as it has been at many other times in history. And Noah is saying, hey, we're starting over. Maybe now we can enjoy wine responsibly. Because when we look at that thing, say, he was in his tent naked, people want to say, oh, he got drunk, that was what was wrong. Maybe he was thinking, it's okay to get drunk now. The consequences of being drunk have been removed because a lot of bad guys are dead. But some shady stuff goes on. So, that's a lesson learned. We can see that. But even you think, you go ahead to Jesus at the wedding, and he creates wine, and he's saying, my time hasn't come. What does that mean? My time hasn't come. My time to enjoy the wedding banquet, the wedding feast. My wedding time hasn't come. And at the Last Supper, he says, until I come back in my, until I come back, this is the last time I'm going to enjoy the fruit of the vine. The fruit of the vine is a taste. He's having his Last Supper is a foretaste of the greater fulfillment of things to come. So what does that mean? In the new heaven and the new earth, getting drunk will be a wholly positive experience. Or I don't want to say getting drunk, but the effect of wine will be all the good parts about it and none of the bad parts about it. However we can't imagine it exactly, but the point is that there's a significance to that, and there's a significance to bread. Manna coming down, bread from heaven. There's all sorts of times where people are baking bread in the Bible. It's important to realize. There's a lot of stuff about study. Young students are studying now. The Bible has a lot to say about studying. They were particularly talking about studying the Word, studying the Torah. God has a lot of very direct things to say about why we should do that and how we should do that. So that's a theme that can stand out. There's things like nations, politics. That's a big theme. The sword and the trowel, work and warfare. When is it appropriate to be one and not the other? There's a lot of work kind of things like shepherding, which, a shepherd has a lot of time to sit there and study his sheep, to ruminate. And of course, the last one I put here is just like money. Money's a big theme. Now, this is not exhaustive of the themes of the Bible. This is very, very small amount. And even within some of these things, you'll see I put a little bit of color, like, on the hems of the garments, the Israelites are supposed to have a little blue thread, put it on the flag, blue in the river. Is there some significance to why it's blue? What does blue mean? Is that a symbolic thing? Other places, red is obviously symbolic of blood, but there's a lot of other things that are red, a red cord. So these are sort of things that we can pick out. Now, some of the problem is that, as you see here, except for this modern dollar sign, this does not look like the meal we typically eat. This is, maybe you get to see this occasionally at a park, but most of the time there's a lot of mini malls and things scattered across the landscape. This is probably not what your dad or you or anybody you know does when they go to work. Stand there in front of a bunch of sheep. Potentially could be. We don't write with quills. People don't use swords very much anymore. And so there is a sort of disconnect between the Bible and us. And so the other work that has to be done is starting with the things that we can understand most basically is universally. So family is a thing. Now there is a lot of confusion about what is a family today. And I would say a big part of the reason for that is because people haven't studied what the Bible has said. And with all the confusion and a lot of different voices saying this is a family, that is a family consists of X, Y, and Z, the Bible is a good place to go for clarity. But other things, we don't have the same experience with our food as people did back then. making food was a large part of a person's day. Today, it's much more convenient. We don't farm for our food, we just go to the market. Now, people had markets back then, so that was something that people experienced. But, you know, even the fact that they didn't have refrigerators, so whatever you bought, you might have to go to the market every day if you. So you thought about your food differently. It just affects you differently. You know, warfare and things like that. That's a much scarier topic now in the modern era. It means very much different things, and I would say as something like shepherding, you know, work. Most people don't interact with anything physical when they work, except maybe a computer. So there is a problem there. So we have to kind of do this two levels of interpretation. One is to get the information from the Bible related to our own experience with all these things. But then we have to go beyond that and take our modern experience, you know, nobody even has a cord on their mouse anymore, but, you know, a computer and a keyboard, and that's work now. And money is just a debit card, or it could just be an app on your phone, you know? And a lot of study is just on our phone. Warfare is just as much sitting behind a computer, you know, with things like drones, as any other job is. So, like, the distinction between a shepherd and a soldier might not be that different in some instances, or a construction worker. Now, so this is something I do, and one thing that I found is helpful is I work in the current time, and because of that, I have many modern benefits to working in construction: power tools, electricity, cordless tools. A lot of these things make it much more convenient. However, I've also taken the time to learn about the older methods of doing things, hand tools, you know, even to the most basic, a chisel and a hammer, an axe. And if you've spent the time to chop down a tree with an axe, it will radically change your perspective on building something like a temple or a palace compared to the amount of time it takes with a chainsaw. And so, you know, that's something that's kind of a problem with the modern era, I would say, is that because everything is of such convenience, we don't think about hardly any of these things. And, you know, like most of these categories, it's just phones and computers have replaced so much of this stuff. Now, food is still real food, hopefully. You could just eat processed food all the time. That's not great. Family is still, hopefully, something that's real. Nature is still there. It's still real. Most of the world still has trees and fields and mountains. And so it's really important for us to spend time learning about these things, understanding them, and relating to them, because we need that background of knowledge to really understand the significance of it within the Bible. But we also have to do the work of, once we understand the importance of shepherding in the Bible, and then realize shepherding doesn't exist the same way, but it was a person's occupation, and then we take that and we apply it to the new thing that's replaced it. And some of this is like, I don't know, I don't have experience with this. Like, I don't spend my time writing code or something like that. But what this means is that a person who is a coder might need to, as a hobby, maybe learn something about shepherding. Or maybe you could say, oh, we don't have shepherds anymore, but we have, you know, you have cats and you have dogs. So you can learn something about taking care of a cat and dog, and some of the things that the Bible has to say about raising sheep and dealing with animals and stubborn donkeys and things like that could help you understand that. Because my dog is definitely frustrating at times. She doesn't understand why she shouldn't knock over a trash can and make a big mess. She's just a dog. And so then I have to learn patience, because this is an animal. And maybe I think about, wow, I just have to deal a little bit with my dog doing dumb stuff every once in a while. She's really a very good dog. But you think a guy who's just watching sheep all day, and like Jesus said, he's got 100 sheep. 99 of them are fine. But this one goes and gets stuck in a ditch somewhere, and he's got to get it. And I don't know if you've seen the videos of these sheep falling into ditches, but they're not very smart creatures. And I think that God creates these things so that we can understand, like, wow, I have to be really gentle and patient with a sheep because it's not smart. It can't understand what I'm saying. And then we step back and say, oh, but God created us, and compared to us, he calls us sheep, or compared to him, he's the shepherd, we are the sheep. So then instead of saying, like, why is God such a jerk, we say, wow, maybe I'm a jerk and God's being very patient with me. It changes our perspective. So this is some of the way that we have to retranslate the Bible. We take it from these things into this outer circle of what it is today. Whether we put a supermarket over here, HEB, that's the one we have here, and nature is it's a park that you go to with a gate on the fence. So you don't get to just walk out there and do whatever you want. You gotta pay to get in. It's a little bit of it's not as majestic of an experience. Or it might be that you just have to go into your backyard, and your backyard is pretty small, but you don't if you don't have mountains to study, well, you could study ants, because the Bible talks about that. So maybe you get some ants in your backyard. You can learn something about ants, and then you can take that back to the Bible. And flowers, they pop up everywhere. So if you can't study massive trees where you live, go see if you find a flower growing in the cracks in a sidewalk, and think about that. Like, what a will to thrive God's put into these things. He said to all the creation, be fruitful and multiply. And like the plants and the animals really took that seriously. We're the ones that are supposed to kind of manage this stuff, and we kind of just let it go. Because if you give weeds a chance, they'll spring up anywhere. It's crazy. When you could be driving down a road and it's just asphalt, concrete, sidewalks, but where there's one crack, there's going to be a big flower growing, something like that. So we continually take our experience out in the world, bring it back to the Bible, learn more about what the Bible has to say, and it opens our eyes to observe more things. And a big part of that is people, learning how people act and behave. That's why the narrative stories are so important, because while the elements in the story may change, the ways that people interact do not. And in fact, it could probably even help us to decipher how some of these things relate, because if we're interacting with somebody about our phones and our computers and the things that happen online, but their behavior mirrors the way Jacob and Esau act, or the way Abraham acts when he's throwing his wife under the bus, it will reveal to us, oh, this is like that situation, and then maybe we can learn something from that story about the person that we're interacting with. So obviously the thing that you could do with this is there's many specifics you could go to, and that's probably what I'll be putting up on a weekly basis as I go through some specific things in the future. We'll see, but hopefully this is helpful and helps to expand what I said in the previous video, and gives you a little bit of a better starting point to thinking this way.